Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session. This is a session by ITE-ANZ, and we're calling this session Worldwide Opportunities for Young IT Members. So we welcome you all to today's session. Firstly, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. We, the ITE-ANZ, acknowledge the Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first inhabitants of the nation and the traditional custodians of the lands where we live, learn and work. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. We also acknowledge and respect the Treaty of Waitangi and the Maori people as the original people of Aotearoa, New Zealand. Most of you are probably ITE members, but in case you aren't, here's a slide just explaining a bit about who we are. We have 16,500 members over many countries around the world, and a lot of what the ITE does will become clearer as our guest speakers talk about their experiences today. I'd like to acknowledge our sponsors, AusTraffic, who will get quite a bit of a mention today, but also our other sponsors, Traffic Works for the Student Award, Sidra Solutions for the President's Dinner and Postgraduate Award, Lindsay Oxlade for the Young Professional Award, and our corporate supporters, O'Brien Traffic, Arup, and Movement and Place Consulting. A plug for our annual President's Dinner, which is coming up tomorrow week on the 22nd of November, so there are still tickets available. It's in Melbourne, so you need to fly to Melbourne if you don't live in Melbourne to attend, and that is kindly sponsored by Sidra Solutions. The guest speaker is Jonathan Spear, who is a reasonably new Chief Executive of Infrastructure Victoria, so that will be very interesting to see what he has to say about the role of those institutions around Australia. Today's presenters are Maddie Salter and Matt Bennett. And it's basically we're reporting on the AusTraffic Worldwide Learning Opportunities and the experience of these two people in going to the annual meeting of the ITE in New Orleans. So a bit of housekeeping to answer Danny's question. Yes, you're all automatically muted, but there aren't a huge number of people in this session. So if you would like to actually say something verbally rather than just through the chat or the Q&A, then raise your hand and I can unmute you and we could have a conversation that way. Otherwise, if you've got particular questions for the presenters, do that through the Q&A button. So with that, I'll hand over to Maddie and she can start her presentation.
Perfect. I'll just share my screen 1 minute. Okay. Can you see it? Yes.
Just go to slideshow view.
Can you see it now? Does that work?
Perfect.
Cool. Okay, perfect. So David, hi, I'm Maddie. And I'm presenting today with Matt. So we did go over this a little bit just before, but ITE stands for the Institute of Transport Engineers, and it's an international membership of transportation professionals who work to improve mobility and safety for all transportation system users and help build smart and livable communities. Most of the members are in North America, so the US and Canada, but we are slowly building the global district here in Australia and New Zealand, and we're expanding it out. One key thing that you might know ITE for is the trip generation manual, which I've definitely used. So yeah, that's something that is used quite frequently. Next slide. So what is ITE-ANZ? It's pretty self-explanatory. It's the Australia New Zealand section of ITE. So we're part of the global district. So it just covers everything outside of North America within the global district. So yeah, it's mostly America, but yeah. And then over to Matt.
Thanks, Maddie. So my name is Matt Bennett. I am an engineer in Aurecon's Integrated Transport and Mobility team based in Melbourne. So I've been involved in ITE for quite a number of years now. So I can run through a little bit around the younger member group and student chapters as well. So back in 2018, there was a student leadership summit that was hosted in Melbourne, and something which spun out of that was the Young Institute of Transportation Engineers Committee, or YITE. So this is a committee that's made up of members of ITE who are 35 years older or younger, and hosts events that cater to young professionals as well as to some students. So examples of events that YITE have hosted in the past include some social events such as end of year drinks, as well as trivia nights. And they've also done some technical sessions of particular interest to young members. So this would often be covering things that transport engineers should know but aren't necessarily taught at universities. And we've also hosted a student design competition as well. YITE often works in tandem with other young member groups in the transport space, as well as some related fields. So it's a fantastic way to further develop your network, as well as just a fantastic way to make some friends. So feel free to reach out to myself or Nikhil, who's the YITE president, if you'd like to get involved or have any ideas for future events. Next slide, please, Maddie. So ITE has had a long tradition of student outreach, and there are many student chapters established at a wide range of universities across the United States and Canada, and more recently in Australia and New Zealand as well. Overall, there's more than 150 student chapters within ITE. Some examples of events and initiatives that are commonly hosted by student chapters include webinars and seminars that discuss different careers in transport to give students some insight into different opportunities within the transport sector, mentoring programs that connect students with professionals in the industry, student leadership summits, such as the one held in Melbourne back in 2018, which are events run by and for students where there are talks and activities. And Traffic Bowl, which is a Jeopardy-style traffic quiz where different university chapters compete head-to-head to test their transport knowledge. The finals of these Traffic Bowls are held at the annual meeting each year. So it's something myself and Maddie got a chance to see when we were over in New Orleans. Examples of student chapters that we have in the Australia and New Zealand section are Monash University, University of Sydney, and the University of Canterbury. ITE is always looking to collaborate more with universities. So if you're at another university and are interested in founding a student chapter at your university, please do reach out to us at ITE. I should also mention student membership for ITE is free. So I would highly recommend that any students who are not already members should join up. All right, next slide. Thanks, Maddie. So what's the ITE annual meeting? So this is a conference of more than 1,500 transport professionals. It's usually held in North America. So this year was held in New Orleans, but has been held elsewhere previously as well. Participants do get a chance to gain insights from industry through leaders sharing experience, and we can also take advantage of networking opportunities as well. So this year's conference had a theme, which was investing in our future, which recognized a profound change and investment that our industry is currently facing and will be moving forward. Next slide, thanks. So what is this worldwide learning opportunity that we had? It's a generous sponsorship from Austraffic that has enabled ITE-ANZ to offer financial support for younger members to attend worldwide conferences, meetings, and other professional events, and that allows us to interact and learn from other professionals. What this sponsorship covers is 75% of the flights, ground transfers, visas, accommodation, and conference fees of up to $4,000. And the aim of this award is to be able to contribute to personal and professional development, which is something I can very much attest to. All right, next slide. Thanks, Maddie. So now I'd like to run through some of just through a taste of some of the key things I learned from my time at the ITE-ANZ annual meeting in New Orleans. But just before I start, a big thank you to John Reed and the Austraffic team, as well as the ITE-ANZ section for sponsoring my trip over there. It was fantastic to be able to attend this event in person, and I wouldn't have learned as much as I did if I had attended virtually. A lot of what I've picked up on and what I'll share as part of this presentation was through face-to-face interactions with fellow transport engineers at the conference itself, as well as some of the social events in the evenings. As the world slowly returns to normal, I would strongly encourage people to look out for and to attend face-to-face industry events such as the ITE dinner, as I believe it is a key activity to do for building relationships and learnings within the industry. So just to start with some interesting facts and stats that I picked up from some of the technical sessions, as well as just general interactions I had with attendees at the conference. So protected intersections for cyclists, they're kind of touted being quite an innovative thing in the road safety space. However, they actually first appeared in the 1970s in the US. However, they were discontinued due to negative feedback from the cyclists, and their concern around these was they thought that by installing these protected intersections, that they would then be banned from using roads. So they wanted to be considered treating as vehicles rather than as a separate mode of transport. Something I learned at one of the plenary sessions was there was 43,000 fatalities on average per year in the US. So that's about 130 per million. And there's also 3 a day in Louisiana, which is a state with a population of 4 million, so less than the size of Melbourne. For a bit of perspective, in Australia, last year we had 1,123 fatalities, which is about 44 per million, so significantly less than what they've got in the US at the moment. One of the more positive things, though, that they're doing at the moment is in their new bipartisan infrastructure bill, they're investing over $50 billion into electric vehicles. And something there around EVs as well is that Louisiana's looking at overcome that loss in the fuel excise by taxing average fuel excise to EV owners at tax time. Some terminology, things which took me a while to pick up on when I was over there. They kept talking about something called bike ped, which I learned eventually meant active transport. And something which surprised me was they call zebra line marking high visibility crosswalk line marking, which I found interesting because it's not necessarily always the case. So next slide, thanks, Maddie. So here are some of my key takeaways. I know it's quite text heavy, but I promise there's pictures coming up. So these are some of my key takeaways from the technical streams that I attended. So something which I learned was around bicycle lanes. And there was quite a bit of discussion around when you've got bicycle lanes that are at the same level as a footpath, there can actually be quite a bit of confusion for visually impaired people, as they're not actually sure where the road starts, or if they're crossing a bicycle lane, or if they're actually entering the roadway itself, and there can be a bit of confusion there. One of the presentations was on a new open source tool which has been developed in Louisiana, which looks at crashes on a network by segments. It's particularly been designed for pedestrians and cyclists. And the great thing about this is it's open source, and it just takes in pretty standard data sets. So as long as you've got the right data sets, you can actually potentially apply this tool in Australia, even though it hasn't necessarily been designed for that application. One of the other things that I learned was around corridor narrowing instead of lane narrowing. I know that there's narrowing lanes is seen as a way of reducing traffic speeds, but one of the presentations is saying actually a more effective way of doing that is reducing that visual corridor. So that can be having things close to the side of the road is much more effective at reducing vehicle speeds. Something in there around delays for pedestrians. So if you've got really long delays for pedestrians and you get an issue of people walking against the red because they feel like it's too long, what you can actually do is if you halve the cycle time, you can reduce that delay for pedestrians while remaining synchronized with the rest of the network. Obviously, there's capacity issues there as well for vehicles. And another thing around delay, there was a study that was done in China that found if the delay was greater than 52 seconds, 95% of cyclists would actually run the red. And these two were done in the context of having countdown timers and the benefits of those, and how people appreciate them and tend not to walk against the red if they've got that red countdown timer. Next slide, thanks. Yes. So one of the many advantages of being able to attend in person was that I was able to attend 3 in-person workshops that included site visits. So the first of these was a workshop on protected intersections. And at the conclusion of the workshop at the hotel that we were at, we walked to a nearby intersection, which was partially closed by police. They did tell us it was going to be fully closed, but certainly wasn't the case. There were people still driving through it. And then we ended up drawing a protected bicycle lane using tape and chalk. we actually had a cyclist, which are they're quite rare in New Orleans, go through it. So there's a photo there of the cyclist. So we took a bit of convincing to use the lane that we had painted or drawn onto the road, but ended up doing that. So next slide, thanks, Maddie. So the second site visit I did was to a project type known in the US as a road diet. So this project is where the number of lanes of road is reduced and priority is often shifted to alternative modes of transport. So this example here, and I've got aerial images. So the top one is before, the bottom one is after. So this is outside New Orleans big convention center, and it reduced what was effectively a 4-lane road to 2 lanes. And then they use that remaining space, which is on the conference center side, as a linear park. So next slide, thanks. So here I've got some photos that I took there. As you can see, it was quite wet, but it was also really hot as well. So it was an interesting experience coming from Melbourne. So these first 2 images show what the cross section of the road was like. So you can see it's 1 lane in each direction, and then they had this wide median. And one of the things they did this median, which I thought was quite clever, to reduce the chance of people trying to use that as an overtaking lane or to speed through there, was actually had that as a cobblestone median. So that emergency vehicles could still get cut past vehicles, but it wasn't encouraging people to drive down there quite quickly. And that bottom picture there is of that linear park you can see there. So it's a nice long kind of pedestrian promenade to walk along outside the convention center. Next slide, thanks. So here were some of the pedestrian facilities that they had on this road diet project. So the left there, I can't remember what exactly they call these. I think they call them flashing pedestrian beacons or something along those lines. They function similar to how zebra crossings would function here, but what they do have is, as a pedestrian's about to cross the road, they can press a little button, and you can see those 2 little LED lights light up and flash quite a lot, just warning cars that there is a pedestrian crossing there. And something I've noticed that they've got a lot of drive-throughs at these sorts of crossings. So I can see the kind of need for having these types here. The image on the top right there, this was a shuttle bus interchange purely for the conference center. So all the shuttle buses can come here, pick up the conference attendants, and ship them off to the various hotels throughout New Orleans. And that bottom one there is a mid-block pedestrian operated signal which connects that bus interchange to that main entrance into the convention center. And they've also got kind of these traffic cone things set up there. And it's not entirely clear there, but you can see there's some little yellow ones there as well. And those ones actually remind drivers that when it's a red light, you're supposed to stop and let the pedestrians cross the road, which I thought was an interesting warning. I would have thought people would have stopped there anyway. Next slide, thanks, Maddie. So the third site visit I had was around pedestrian crossing safety. And so I've circled in red there the pedestrian crossing in question. So this is on the north side of what they call the French Quarter, which is the really touristy part of New Orleans. And this pedestrian crossing connected that to Louis Armstrong Park as well as Congo Square, which are 2 other big tourist attractions and have quite significant. So you've got quite a lot of foot traffic across there. There's also a couple of bus stops there, which you can see, and there's also a streetcar stop there as well. You can see where that nearby signalized intersection is. So the current control there is just pedestrian priority. It's basically a zebra crossing across the road. Next slide, thanks, Maddie. So here's some photos that I took when we were out on site. So that first image on the left there is some people crossing the road there. As you can see, there's the streetcar stop there as well. And then those other 3 photos there I took at the bus stop, and you can see just how close it is to the crossing. So in fact, one of them, the bus stops right on the crossing to let the people off and on. So you can see there's obviously sight distance issues. So as well as that bus stop there, you can actually still have another 2 lanes of traffic than the streetcars as well. So it's quite a lot of movements going on there. Next slide, yes. So took this photo. We wandered down and had a look at the next pedestrian crossing down as well. And what you can actually see here is you've obviously got the one in the foreground, but there is actually one maybe 30, 40 meters down the road there as well. So on the other side, you can see their pedestrian warning signs. But that's it in terms of warning you get there. So you're crossing 2 lanes of traffic, and the streetcar tracks, and then obviously on the other side as well. And there's not much in terms of visibility there as well. And something else to note as well is you can see the no stopping on the approach side of that zebra crossing. You can see there's that little triangle. It's probably a few meters at best. The next slide. Yep. So just in case you think it was all work, we did have some time to hang out in Louisiana, mostly New Orleans. So I've got some examples of some of the stuff that we managed to see. So we obviously went out, saw some alligators. Bourbon Street was a street that we spent some time on in the evenings. New Orleans is also famous for its above ground cemeteries, and there's also quite a strong jazz culture there as well. Okay, I think it's time to hand over to you, Maddie.
Cool. Thank you for that, Matt. That was awesome. It was cool to relive a little bit of that experience. So I just thought I would highlight something that they talked. So ITE, when it's in a certain place, often there's transport, people who work in local and central government that come and talk. So there was a big focus on New Orleans. So I just thought I should flag, so Hurricane Katrina, I'm sure you guys all remember this. This happened in 2005. So in terms of how it impacted, the population and the transport, it was also, very destructive of a lot of things. So, but one key thing that they mentioned was that from before the hurricane to after the hurricane, they lost over half of their people in terms of like just moving out of New Orleans. So that was, it cut the people who were able to take public transit and, transporting around in half, even more than that. So after 10 years, so in 2015, public transport ridership was still down 65% to then what it was before Hurricane Katrina. And I know that, so I work for Auckland Transport, which is a local, the public transport provider in Auckland, New Zealand. And we're having, COVID is our big thing, pre-COVID, post-COVID. And they already had this big hit to their public transport riders because of Hurricane Katrina, and now it's sort of adding on the COVID thing. So yeah, it's quite interesting to see what they've done to sort of try to build that patronage back up. It obviously isn't working super great, but so, and one thing I found that before Hurricane Katrina there was 19 high frequency bus lines, and in 2020 there was only 3. So they hadn't really rebuilt it back up to what it could be, and that would be a lot to do with the fact that the population is a lot lower and stuff. And then I think it was the Secretary of Transport for New Orleans was talking about how a lot of their public transport funding goes to the streetcars, which are really cute and cool and provide a lot of placemaking for New Orleans, but they're not the most efficient ways to get around New Orleans in terms of public transport. And a lot of public money goes to there, and they're mostly used by tourists. But a good thing that has recently come up is that there was a bipartisan infrastructure bill in America, and $7 billion of funding is coming to Louisiana to help build up their public transport and just their transport system over again. So, sorry, I'm going to go to the next slide, if it will move. Yes. Okay. So I had quite a few takeaways. I saw Matt's ones beforehand, so I tried to add on to that. I also thought Matt's overall takeaways were great. And yeah, so my ones were something that I was slightly concerned with when I first applied for this was that, it's the Institute of Transport Engineers, so is it going to be all engineering talking, different, workshops and stuff? But there were 2 streams. So there was a transport engineering one and a transport planning one. So if you're a transport planner, you're welcome here, and there's a lot of stuff for you to learn. Don't be scared by the name. Then another thing is that one of the key parts of this conference was the networking opportunities. So Americans are really friendly. They love Kiwis, they love Australians. And yeah, they were always keen to have a chat, talk about New Zealand, Australia. So that was really cool. So we made a lot of cool connections and friends over there. And then I found that the US, particularly in New Orleans, they were quite far behind New Zealand and Australia when it comes to walking and cycling. It's a very car-centric way. Oh, sorry, a car-centric city. People drive everywhere. It's so different, and you could tell that when people were presenting, it was the main mode was cars, and there's a sort of a slow transition to get out of that into, you know, walking, cycling and stuff. So I really liked this quote from one of the sessions. So in terms of safety, they want to accept who we are and find a more responsible way of dealing with it. And this was in the context of, we are car lovers. Like in America, you know, they have these massive, everyone has these massive trucks or big cars, and it's kind of understanding that this is how the transport system works, and we need to find a more responsible way of dealing with it to reduce those extremely high numbers of deaths and serious injuries on their road network. And then in terms of behavior change, they talked about, you know, you can tell, I liked how they put it, you can tell it, I can tell it to you, but I can't understand it for you. So you can say, you know, public transport is better for the environment, you know, walking, cycling better for the environment, all this kind of stuff. But people can't necessarily understand that, and it really impacts how they change their behavior. And that also goes back to sort of accepting who we are and trying to make a way forward with that. And then similar to the bike ped thing, in America, they call it public transit rather than public transport. So that was another interesting thing. Not as different as bike ped, but yeah, it's slightly jarring. Okay. So I didn't get to do any workshops outside. I wasn't as fortunate as Matt, but I did a couple workshops inside in the conference center. And this is one of my favorite ones. So talking about future-proofing streets. So I was quite impressed. There were a lot of Americans in this one, and they didn't all put car parking in their future-proof streets, which was nice. But I really, yeah, so they talked about future-proofing means it's useful for 100 years. They don't want to widen the road. It needs to be environmentally sustainable. So things like planting trees and stuff. And then walking should always be the #1 priority. And then, yeah, they talked about how, you know, different speeds causes for different ways of putting cycling lanes on and off the road. And I think in New Zealand, we call it tactical urbanism. So they talked about future-proofing these streets by trialing it. So the intermediate stage, it's a little bit more, yeah, the hit sticks and that kind of thing, getting people used to it and then moving it on, because people need a little bit of time to adjust. So I thought that was quite interesting. And I really liked how they talking about bringing the community with you rather than being like, we know what we're doing and you need to get with the program. It was more like, we need to sort of ease people into this change, particularly when places are so car-centric. So I did, here's a picture of me with a gator. I did a couple of the sessions actually were about transport and health. And I mean, I'm sure we all know how much those two things intersect, like, you know, transport outcomes, health outcomes. And one person talked a lot about rider dignity. So how do people feel when they're taking public transport, which I know is very different to the transport engineering kind of side of it. It's more of transport planning. So are people able to, you know, easily and safely use public transport? And I think that's a really cool thing that we should, you know, put at the forefront, because as it says down sort of further down in the comments, PT, so in the South, you might have heard of Southern hospitality, where they're just sort of overly nice. And that can be quite jarring coming from New Zealand, because it seems kind of sarcastic when they do it to begin with, but they're actually just really nice. So providing PT as a service, so servicing these areas, or are you providing a service? So that was quite cool. I thought that was, you know, thinking about people being comfortable and being hospitable, rather than just being like, we are giving you a vehicle to get from A to B, be grateful kind of thing. So this is, I guess less so in New Zealand, but in America, they were talking about how if you see any data, you need to ask what's in the data, where does the data come from, who's paying for the data to be collected. Data is a very powerful tool, and it can be created to just help push an agenda or justify sort of certain things. So it can be, yeah, just be careful with data. Health equity. So I think there's a big push, I know particularly in New Zealand, to sort of get people out of their cars, but cars can be a part of transport equity and health equity. And the example that this person used was, old people, if they, lose their license for different reasons, they might not be able to go to church, they might not be able to see friends, which has a negative impact on their mental health. So mental and physical health are also really important parts of health equity. It's not just, getting people to walk and cycle more, it's also their mental health. And then I just sort of really liked the idea that people are giving us their time. So we should respect that and deliver really high quality public transport, but just also transport systems in general. Cool. So I also went to one that was perspectives of transportation leaders, and I was saying this just before we got on the call, but so Louisiana has over 30,000 bridges, which I just thought was mind-boggling. And they also have the longest one in America. So you can see that picture at the top up there. That is, it's 38.4 kilometers long. And when I heard about it, and then when I was leaving to fly out of New Orleans, I could see it, and it just went on. You couldn't even see the end of it. It was crazy. I don't even know. I would love to know how they built that. It was just so impressive. So particularly with New Orleans, so they get hit by hurricanes a lot, but they're also quite low lying, so like below sea level. And with climate change, there's going to be more rain. The sea level is rising even more. I think they predict that New Orleans will be underwater in about 100 years if nothing's done about it. And then that just doesn't help when there are these big hurricanes like Hurricane Katrina. And then the growth of the city is slow, and the infrastructure is aging quite a bit. So those are the key challenges, but they did flip it back and say there are lots of opportunities. There's a lot of innovation going on in the climate space. The New Orleans people are, they went through Hurricane Katrina. They're tough. They're very resilient. There's some great leaders. We had the Secretary of Transport for Louisiana there, and he seemed like a really cool, forward-thinking guy. And then there is investment coming in, particularly from that bipartisan infrastructure bill. So there's a lot of cool stuff happening in the space. So a couple key takeaways from this, which was, I just thought it was quite interesting coming from New Zealand. So someone said we're not adding very many lanes, and as it was a bad thing, like we need to add more lanes, whereas I feel like we're sort of here trying to not add lanes, the induced demand. So it was quite interesting that was seen as a bad thing. And they talked about having good bike and pedestrian share, so people cycling and walking, which we didn't really see, but maybe they're just walking different places or cycling other places. But they said that was unfortunate, and it was a lot to do with the fact that there's a lot of poverty in New Orleans, so people can't afford cars, so they'll walk or bike. So that was an interesting look at something that we would see as positive, but this person didn't necessarily see it as positive. So I just want to hand over to John Reed. He's on the call today. So we just really want to give a huge thank you to John Reed from Austraffic for this really generous sponsorship of the scholarship, because neither Matt nor I would have been able to go to this conference without it. So just like to hand over to John to give a little bit of a chat. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Worldwide learning opportunities. Well, Maddie and Matt represent and are the epitome of the Worldwide Learning Opportunity Program. Maddie, Matt, and those who received this award previously all return home with greater insight and exposure to a network and technical awareness, and most importantly, a camaraderie that expands outside their pre-existing network. This program evolved from a conversation between past ITE-ANZ President Nick Sweat and I. It evolved from a genuine desire to give young people the opportunity to network and grow by expanding their vision and horizon of thought. I doubt many of us have at an early age a vision of our life master plan. I meet many young people with a common theme being they're trying too hard to comprehend their next best goal to achieve or preordain their career master plan. For most of us, life is the story of the wisdom of hindsight. What did we learn from our last mistake? We should have vision. I carry the expression, a man or woman with a plan will always outpace those with none. And my best piece of advice would be to chill a moment and console your desire to have all the answers to your life story. The dots of the journey will join with the passing of time. But preparedness is about an education and then connecting. We can't define all aspects of our future, while we can define the processes. Recognising an opportunity and worldwide learning is an opportunity. Pursuits of networks and personal growth opportunities do matter and eventually aid the probability of your success rather than failure. Your connection to a broader network also provides camaraderie and a context to learn from history. Good networking and learning is also advanced by undertaking a postgrad course at some stage in your career. This is more than mere learning. It is connecting with other professionals undertaking the same course, and they probably will be more useful than your undergrad classmates. Engage with your professional associations and technical forums and conferences. Maddie and Matt, thank you for your engaging presentations. I wish you well on the next phases of your careers and hope you enjoy the active engagement in professional association of ITE-ANZ. And then within the theme of learning from history and past learnings, I point you to the AusTraffic website where we feature some of the heroes of data. And thank you.
Thanks, John, for those wonderful words. I'll just throw it open to any other questions or discussion that people would like to raise. I find that when I am looking particularly at the ITE forums, the online forums, one of the difficulties is coming to terms with their terminology, which is often quite different. You know, things like bike ped and transit, and Matt mentioned flashing beacons, which are RRFBs. Now, do you know what an RRFB is? I actually had to look it up. It's rectangular rapid flashing beacons, and they're the flashing lights underneath the pedestrian crossing signs. So I've got one question, then I might hand over to Nick, who's got a question. Matt, you mentioned Louisiana is looking at replacing the money they lose from fuel excise because of electric vehicles with some other form of taxes. Do you know, did you get any further information about how that's going to happen? Is it going to be a per kilometre charge?
I can't recall off the top of my head. It was kind of just a comment made by the Secretary of Transport that was kind of how they're planning on dealing with that issue. I suspect they were kind of just looking at it, what the average was going to be, and then say, you know, the average petrol car will have to pay X number of dollars in tax, so therefore EV owners would have to do the same. That's my recollection of what they were planning on doing. I don't know if they were looking at a more complex version by looking at per kilometre or something along those lines.
Yeah, and so another thing that I was looking through my notes that I took during the conference, and one thing that they mentioned that they have, I think it's like 18.4 cents a litre tax on their fuel, which hasn't gone up since like 1980 or something. So they're looking at sort of overhauling a lot of that system and trying to make it more relevant to not just upgrade that infrastructure that they have and maintain it, but also add more in. So yeah, there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done, but EVs is part of it as well.
Cool. Nick, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, well, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Well spoken, Matt and Maddie. That was informative, and thanks very much. And what a great program, John. Good on you, mate. You sort of answered it a little bit. I think the I've always, I mean, I visited there a long time ago in Chicago. That must have been 20 years ago. And I really went there with high hopes and hoping to discuss all sorts of leading stuff, especially about speed limits. And I just couldn't raise any discussion. So I'm just sort of, my question is, did you hear anyone talking about population growth? Like here, we're talking about Melbourne doubling in population, and you know, we're having a debate about now to rail because we can't just double our roads. We've got to build public transport. Do you get any discussion like that going at all, or hear it anywhere? Or is it just saying, you know, we've got to have sustainable transport like bikes and peds for the poor?
That's a really good question. I do know that they mentioned that New Orleans population is growing very slowly.
Okay.
That was something that I do remember, and particularly after, you know, its population halved after Hurricane Katrina. So there's a little bit of that. Can you recall anything, Matt?
What about the rest of the country? You know, that's just New Orleans, but other parts are growing rapidly.
I don't recall any discussion around dealing with population growth, but yeah, backing up what Maddie said, in terms of New Orleans, it really wasn't considered because it's not an issue, certainly not to the extent that Melbourne has it. But yeah, and the focus was primarily on New Orleans when they were talking about city-related issues, because that's the Secretary of Transport was one of the key speakers there. So he was very much talking about Louisiana's issues.
Still ahead of them on that too, eh?
Cool. We have another question for either of you. Do transport leaders in the US look overseas for guidance and best practice to achieve more sustainable transport outcomes like we do here? We tend to look to the UK and the EU. Does the US look outside its own borders?
That's an excellent question. Matt, do you want to?
Sometimes I think would be the answer to that. Probably not as much as they should.
Yeah, or as much as we do.
Yeah, certainly. I think they kind of, and so they'll sometimes refer to the Dutch for cycling or something along those lines. But I have a feeling there's certainly some things they could really benefit from learning, particularly from some of the stuff that we do out in Australia and New Zealand. I think they could benefit from. I think there's issues around, particularly looking at road safety things, just risk appetite. Like, for example, that crossing that I went to for my site visit, I think in Australia, you would have to signalise that. It's at an intersection as well. There's not really an alternative or no crossing point. But signalised intersection there felt like overkill to the Americans there on the site visit. So I think they kind of need to have a look at that a bit as well.
Yeah, and I think there's also a bit of comparing state to state or city to city, like looking at, you know, they often refer to Portland, where the next ITE annual meeting is next year. If you guys are keen, you could potentially get the scholarship to go to. But they are looking internally a lot as well, like to different cities, and some are more progressive than others, like Portland. But I had a friend that just went to Portland who's a transport planner as well, and he said it's good for American standards, but not necessarily, not like the Dutch or anything. So that's a good question.
I think they probably tend to make comparisons between USA and Canada because there's quite a large ITE presence in Canada as well. But my impression is that they don't look much outside their own borders.
Yeah, and I did, so the first workshop that I talked about was with an American guy, but the last workshop I did on the final day was with a Canadian guy, and it was a very different tone. I did notice that. It was quite interesting. I think Canada's probably in between sort of us and America, but yeah, they're definitely more progressive in terms of, you know, what would we would consider progressive in transport in Canada.
So I've got another question for you, Maddie. You said that public transport was still down to 65%. Was it? I can't remember whether it was down by 65% or down to 65%. That's a huge reduction. If they only reduced their population by 50%, and presumably a lot of those people would have come back since then.
Yeah.
Why is it down by so much?
That's a great question. I think so. They cut services, so it's just not as workable for everyone, which is a key part of it. So it was like 89% of jobs in New Orleans are within 30 minutes drive, but only 11% of jobs are within a 30-minute public transport trip. So it's just not a competitive option for a lot of people. And then there is just that car-centric kind of American view. And, you know, there's a river in the middle that, you know, people will ferry over, but there's also a huge bridge that you can drive over. There's plenty of parking everywhere. So I think there's a lot of catering towards the private vehicle driver versus the public transport.
But those factors would have been there before the hurricane. So
Yeah,
the only thing I can think of after
yeah.
the hurricane is that they've removed a lot of services, and therefore people aren't using it.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing. Yeah, I think that's the key part of it. And they just, you know, it's kind of the chicken and the egg thing, where like if you cut services, then people don't use it as much. But if you you know, you can't fund heaps of services that people aren't using, it's like, yeah, it's this dichotomy that they're sort of trying to work towards. But then COVID on top of that, which yeah, there's a lot going on. So yeah, it is. But hearing that 65% drop in public transport use is just, the thought of that here in Auckland, I'm like, oh my gosh. And then after 10 years, it was still 65% of what it was before Hurricane Katrina. So it's pretty crazy. Yeah,
it is hard to understand. Nick, you've got your hand raised. If anyone else would like to raise a question, we'll go to Danny first, because Nick's already had one go.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for the presentation, guys. Fantastic. Also helped me relive some of the brief memories I had. I didn't get to leave the convention centre too much, had too many meetings. So it looks like you had a good time. But I just want to add, with regards to the US in particular, not necessarily looking outwards, the ITE is developing a transport wiki, and I'll be focusing on that during 2023. And this is our opportunity from New Zealand and Australia to contribute, to help, I guess, add to the ITE's knowledge base when they develop this wiki. So they'll obviously have the US and Canadian views on how they address certain matters, but it's an excellent opportunity for us to add our views on how we address it, and that will help potentially them learn how other people are doing it without them necessarily even looking outwards, just using the wiki. So anyone who's on this call now, you know, it will be available for people to add to, as wikis are. It's going to be moderated, of course, but yeah, it's an excellent opportunity moving forward. That's all I wanted to add. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks for that, Danny. Nick, did you want to add anything else?
Actually, it follows on very nicely from what Daniel just said. I was thinking, like when I went to the annual meeting at Chicago, I presented a paper on some of the work I was doing in road safety and heavy vehicles, and my organisation paid for the trip. John Reed didn't pay for my trip then. I don't know where he was at that time. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is, if anyone, and including Maddie and Matt, if you're doing something interesting that you think might be of value to the Americans, just like Daniel said, why not prepare a little bit of a paper and submit it and be one of the speakers at the next conference? There's a challenge to everyone listening.
Yes, that's a very good idea. And I presented a short paper to the Toronto annual meeting, and that was a great experience for me as well. Okay, look, there aren't any more questions, and I'd like to thank Maddie and Matt for their wonderful presentations, and also to John Reed for his few words, but more particularly to John Reed for actually sponsoring this exercise, which is open to all young ITE members. If they want to go to an ITE annual meeting or any other conference around the world, they only need to apply. Applications are open continuously, so it's just an ongoing program.
And
I'd
feel-
like to give,
Oh, sorry,
yes,
just
go,
say,
Maddie.
feel free to reach out to myself or Matt. I'm just saying Matt, but I'm sure he won't mind. On, you know, sorry, LinkedIn, contact us, or email. We can pop our emails in the chat, and we're more than happy to help you out with your applications as well.
Thanks for that, Maddie. And just a final plug for our annual dinner, which is on Tuesday next week. There are still tickets available and also sponsored tables available. So if you work for a company that can get together 10 people to do a table, that would be wonderful. So that's it. Thank you very much for your attendance, and we hope to see you at the dinner or at our next webinar, or maybe even a seminar in person if we're lucky. Okay, so we'll end it there, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Well done, folks.
Thanks, everyone.